Kindle less as a graveyard and more as a retirement home where all of the books can gather together and sit and think about their actions. Are you a 99p clickbait sale? Think about your actions. Was your real cover too hideous to sit on my shelves and so I had to buy you on my Kindle? Think about your actions. Were you purchased purely because of the hype and then promptly, immediately forgotten about? Think about your actions. And before you tell me that this sounds more like a prison than a retirement home, then you're wrong. Some of these books are so old that we're on our 5th hip replacement and our 3rd pair of dentures. It's Leanne, and you're here to trash all of my past choices. Now, I haven't done a Trash My TBR in quite some time, but that is because I, in general, am quite good at trashing my own TBR. I recently reorganised my shelves. I got rid of a whole lot of books. I had a birthday and got a ton of new books. I got rid of a whole lot of other books. Just what is the sun? Like, are you folk dancing right now? Can we please? Rude. When it comes to my physical TBR, I literally have 100 book on haul sitting on my floor right now because everywhere is closed and there is nowhere else to take them. In fact, I'm so good at weeding through my own books that we almost never get to the stage where I ask you guys for your opinions, because when I've decided that it needs to come off of my shelves, it just needs to come off of my shelves. I literally never want to see it again. I think in my entire history of unhauling, I've repurchased maybe 3 books that I've regretted. Just, you know, a little side note for you people who are building like an extension onto your house to host a library of books that you don't like or will never read. However, as an imperfect human, I have discovered one rather large area of failing. I have completely fallen out of the habit of cleaning off my Kindle. And yes, when I say cleaning off, I mean deleting permanently. I used to regularly go through and delete books that I just decided that I hated or that I was never going to read again. And it was great. We had a lovely time, my Kindle and I. But then it died and it took me a little while to get a new one. And then by that time, choices had been made. And so we find ourselves here with me begging you guys to help me. You know my taste. In fact, in some cases I think you guys know my taste better than I do. But many of you are also good at telling me not to read books that I will hate, and all of the reasons why. So today I'm going to tell you about a selection of my Kindle books that for some reason or another are sitting in dusty and neglected corners. The books that I will scroll rapidly past rather than, you know, download them and see if they're any good. Before we start, I will once again preface this by saying I like opinions, and so I will not be upset if you trash these books. I will in fact be royally upset if you do not. Leanne has no skin in this game. The money has already been sent. Just tell me if it's worth my eyeball time, okay? Oh yeah, and one more thing. Because I like to commit to unrealistic expectations, whichever one of these books that you guys trash the least, the one that is the least offensive, the one that because nobody hates it I should probably actually try it, I'm gonna put that one on my TBR for next month. So trash wisely, young Pachycephalosaurus. What? I am aggressively not a Star Wars fan. I am in fact a Star Trek and Jurassic Park fan. So now you're a tiny dinosaur, okay? Trash wisely, tiny dinosaurs, because poor Leanne is gonna have to read the scraps. First up, we're gonna start with Beetraid by Emily Henry. Now, in fairness to me, this one only came out in May 2020, so it hasn't been in the retirement home for quite that long. But I will admit that it made the top of this list because it is the book that I am least likely to actually spontaneously read. See, when I originally picked this one up, I thought that it was just a meet-cute romance between 2 writers. And I suppose technically it is that. January writes rom-coms and she's gone to the beach to write her next novel, and Augustus writes literary fiction and he has also gone to the beach to write his next novel. Both of them are suffering from complete writer's block, and then they meet each other on the beach one evening and, you know, nice things happen. Probably with a complicated side of not actually talking to each other in the moment when it really matters, because it's a rom-com. Feels like a prerequisite. But then the blurb goes on to say a few things that I just... So first of all, it says that the type of literary fiction that Augustus writes is the type that kills off his entire cast at the end, which sounds much more like a thriller or a crime novelist than it does a literary fiction novelist. And then also apparently what they do is they swap writing projects. So he starts writing a rom-com to try and, you know, break himself out of his groove, and she starts to try and write the next great American novel. But apparently in swapping these projects, she takes him on like road trips that you would maybe have in a rom-com, and he takes her to interview the surviving members of backwoods cults, which again, not literary fiction. So I'm not gonna lie, I'm just deeply suspicious of this entire concept at this point and would like confirmation if it is indeed as trash as I believe it may be in my brain. Oh, and of course it goes without saying that if you've loved any of these books / if they are your favourite books, then you can go ahead and tell me that, but mostly I just want you guys to trash things. Just rip them apart. Do your girl a solid and get rid of some of these books. Next up, I have one that was published slightly earlier last year in like February, and this is Trust Exercise by Susan Choi. Now the weird thing about this one is that I am actually still quite excited about it, but I can't make myself pick it up because of a very weird blurb that I read. See, the original blurb that I read for this one simply said that it's kind of bordering on dark academia, like Donna Tartt meets Gillian Flynn, and I was very there for that. It's about a group of students, but particularly two who meet and fall in love, and they're a really strange drama teacher who makes them play some very interesting trust exercises. He apparently starts like playing this dangerous game with them, which like blurs the line between fiction and reality. And in principle, that sounds like a great blurb. That sounds like a blurb that I would be really deeply invested in. But then I read this version of the blurb. What the reader believes to have happened to David and Sarah and their friends is not entirely true, though it is not entirely false either. It takes until the book's stunning coda for the final piece of the puzzle to fall into place, revealing truths that will resonate long after the final sentence. And now I'm just like, yeah, nah. Sounds like the word that the writer of that blurb was actually looking for was pretentious. And I just don't have time for that in my life. So tell me guys, is this pretentious? Is this a book that I'm going to hate? Trash it for me. Do my reading job for me. Next up we have Scrublands by Chris Hamer, which is the first book in the Martin's Somebody or Other series. This one was recommended to me by many people because I love Jane Harper. And it does seem to tick most of the boxes that I like, in that it is definitely about an investigation, but it's not a traditional investigator. This guy is an investigative journalist. He arrives in like a small backwoods town to write about a local tragedy that his newspaper won many awards for their investigative journalism. But now that he's there and he's getting all this information from people who were around at the time and local rumours, he's now starting to think that maybe potentially actually his paper was involved in covering up stuff that it really shouldn't be. But my issues with this one are threefold. First of all, this one is 500 pages long, which is about 200 pages too many for your average thriller. Secondly, I'm worried that the only reason people have really highly recommended this one to me is because it's the only other sort of large thriller to have a lot of money thrown behind it by the publishers to come out of Australia in a while. So it's less like you will specifically like this book and more like you specifically like this one other author who does this thing and here's another one. But third, it's because the amount of times that I've heard this book described as pedestrian has been a lot. There's also quite a few people who complain about the really repetitive writing in it and like why Martin constantly has his head in his hands. But 500 pages is too much of an investment unless somebody can give me specific reasons to read this. Next up, I've got Don't You Forget About Me by Mhairi McFarlane, otherwise known as the most ironically titled book in the world because I bought it and I promptly forgot about it. This one is another rom-com. It's about Georgina who gets fired from a really awful job and then dumped in the exact same day and is left kind of like, what the hell am I doing with my life? She then coincidentally ends up taking a job as a barmaid at a pub which is run by her old high school crush. And the blurb sort of implies that as soon as she gets there she's like, oh well, I have done nothing with my life and look at you, you're so broodingly handsome and you own a pub. Looking back on it as well, this one was kind of sold to me as like a rom-com with hidden depths, which just really leaves a horrible taste in my mouth because it kind of implies that rom-coms don't have depth to them at all people ever, and that if they do, then it has to be hidden in order to appeal to people. Mhairi McFarlane is also kind of constantly touted at me as somebody who is for people who loved Bridget Jones, and that is a comparison that I am so over. So I guess if I'm honest, it's not necessarily this book so much as the preconceptions that I have about this book. And also, it does not help that out of all of the people that I know who have read this, half of them have given it 3 stars and the other half have DNF'd it. Like, it's not looking good for you, book. That's all I'm saying. It's not looking good for you. Trash it. Next up, I have a mildly controversial one. I have Lock Every Door by Riley Sagar. I like Riley Sagar's books just fine. Final Girls was pretty good. I was mildly bored during the last time I lied, and I'm quite excited about the premise of Home After Dark, although I don't own it. So Lock Every Door is already suffering because it's the book that comes in between the book that I was bored about and the book that I'm really excited about. So it's just stuck in this kind of like limbo. So this one is about Jules, who I'm not exactly sure how ends up getting an apartment in an apartment building that is extremely sought over. Like, bitches would kill people to get into this apartment building. But it has some weird rules, and the rules are no visitors, no nights spent away from the apartment, and no disturbing the other residents, all of whom are rich or famous or both. So she moves in and then she gets to know one of her next door neighbours who turns out to be kind of a creepy person, and she gets drawn into something or other. This one does suffer from the hype train problem. By the time that it came out, I was thoroughly sick of listening to everybody talk about it. But the last thing that's making me kind of like about it is that everybody that I've spoken to whose opinion I trust about thrillers has said that it is needlessly slow for the first half of the book. Now, I don't mind slow-paced thrillers. I am not somebody who thinks that a thriller needs to be like revealing something on every 3rd page to keep me hooked. But it's the needlessly slow thing that gets me. Like, am I going to be slogging through pages and pages of this girl like whining about her breakup and how mysterious her neighbours are before anything actually happens? I don't know. Do you know? Trash it. Next up is one that I'm gonna be honest, I'm just a little bit sad about, because the thing that has really crushed it for me is hype. This is The Wrath in the Dawn by Renée Ahdieh, and it is the first in a duology, I think. It's a YA fantasy, and it's essentially a Scheherazade retelling. So in this world, for whatever reason, we've got to the point where the prince is taking a new bride every night to look for something. But every morning the court wakes up and finds her with a silk cord wrapped around her neck, dead. So our main character, Shahrazad's best friend, gets picked as one of these wives and is dead the next morning, and she vows revenge. So she volunteers herself to be a bride, and there is where the Scheherazade retelling starts. But every night as she's spinning these stories, Shahrazad discovers a little bit more about the prince, until when she is alive in the morning, not only is everybody else surprised, but also she is surprised that he is nothing like what she thought he would be. That's a really dodgy explanation of that blurb, but I don't really feel bad about it because I know that you guys all already know exactly what this one is about. Everybody has read this. Anybody who reads any kind of YA fantasy has read this. Anybody who likes fantasy retellings of any kind has read this. It is not a book that people will be shy to say, I love that, that was my favourite, it was so good. And that scares the crap out of me. This one has over 100,000 ratings on Goodreads, and it's got like a 4.9, and it scares me. The other thing that I'm a bit worried about with this one is that when people do criticise it, the thing that they seem to be criticising is about the writing style. That it seems very forced and overly flowery, almost like performative, I guess. Like you're definitely being told a story as opposed to being able to just suspend your disbelief and sink into a book. And I don't want that, especially not right now. I just want to like turn my brain off and go somewhere else. So what do you guys think? Will I like this one, or is this just like a nah? The next one that I've got is The Minders by John Marrs. Now I picked this one up after absolutely loving The One by John Marrs. The writing style was great. It was so pacey and snappy, and things kept happening that I just did not expect. This one was only published in 2020 as well, and I know for a fact that it was on like a $1.99 sale. But the reason that I've become reluctant to pick this one up is because it's about governments and government secrets, and right now I feel like that's a little bit too close to the bone, you know? I don't want to hear about the things that governments are keeping from us. I already know the things that they're screwing up in public. In this book, we're in the not so distant future, and like computers can be hacked and nothing is safe, so people have turned all of the government's top secret stuff into a genetic code and have implanted it into 5 people. So the genetic code of these 5 individuals together hold all of the government's most classified secrets and like big scary conspiracy stuff. But the problem is then somebody finds out who those secret keepers are and starts hunting them down. The premise sounds like fine, but it also doesn't sound like something that I'm that worried about. And realistically, with how many other books are on my Kindle and also just on my thriller shelf, it's like, do I want to read one about a government conspiracy when I don't really care about government conspiracies? I don't know, you tell me, that's your job. Next up, we have An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson, which takes the prize for being the one and only book on my entire Kindle that I would rather own in physical format because it is so beautiful. However, it's also a YA fantasy romance and it doesn't have the best reviews. This one is about Isabel. She's a painter and she exists in a world wherein the fae, the fair folk, cannot make human crafts themselves. They can't bake, they can't write, they can't paint, and so they get humans to do that for them. She gets a really big fancy client, she paints him the portrait of his dreams, but she paints human sorrow in his eyes, and because she's done that, it makes him look weak to the rest of the court. And I don't know, like hijinks and bad things ensue. I assume they fall in love at some point. The complaints about this one are that it's for the type of romance reader who likes the kind of like headstrong, can-do-yourself girl who gets kidnapped essentially and then falls for the guy when she realises he's not actually that bad. And that is not my jam. Apparently there's a lot of insta love, there's a lot of like I've known you for 5 minutes but I feel like I've known you forever things. And the thing is that can be done well, but I'm kind of dubious about whether it is in this one, and I just need somebody else to just tell me to get rid of the pretty book that's on my Kindle and just forget about it, and then I'll be less sad about the fact that this cover exists for a book which is potentially poo. Second from last, I have got The Body Lies by Jo Baker. Now, this is the author who wrote Longbourn, which is a novel that I didn't particularly care for in terms of the plot and where it went, but I really, really loved the writing. I loved the way her characters interacted, I loved the way they were described, they were very vivid to me, and so when I discovered that she had published a psychological thriller, I was like, I will have that. But this is another one where I feel like I was promised one thing and I was given something else. This one was billed to me as a writer going off into the countryside to try and write a book, also trying to be a single mum and do all those kinds of like boundary breaking things, and then creepy things happen in the cottage that she can't explain. However, that does not seem to be what most of the blurbs actually say. Allow me to read you the quite short blurb and I think you will understand all of my reservations. When a young girl accepts a job at a university in the remote English countryside, it's meant to be a fresh start, away from the bustle of London and the scene of a violent assault she is desperate to forget. But despite the distractions of her new life and the demands of single motherhood, her nerves continue to jangle. To make matters worse, during class a vicious debate about violence against women inflames the tensions and mounting rivalries in her creative writing group. When a troubled student starts turning in chapters that blur the lines between fiction and reality, the professor recognises herself as a main character in his book, and he has written her a horrific fate. Will she be able to stop life imitating art before it's too late? Now, I will also say that most of the reviews for this book talk about the fact that the book itself breaks down the fetishising of women and does not build this up as a thing. It's not saying it's like a good thing or using it as just a plot thing, which is both very timely and also something I don't think I want to read right now, unless it's done like really, really well. This one was published in 2019, so I guess at the time when this discussion was becoming a larger and larger thing in the media. But given recent events, I don't know if my brain wants to do that. If it's something like The Nowhere Girls, which is one of my favourite books of all time, then I don't want to miss it. So this is one that I definitely need you guys' help with. Have you read it? Do you think that it was well written? Was it a good representation of this argument? Or does it not manage to do enough justice because it is a thriller? You tell me. And finally, the last one that I have got is Tall Oaks by Whitaker. Now, when I tell you about this book, you guys are going to be like, Leanne, why did you buy that in the first place? That has like approximately 5 things in it that you hate. This is about a 3-year-old going missing, so there's like the first that I hate. It turns into a manhunt where everybody is a suspect, so like there's a second thing that I hate. There's a weird suggested romance between the mother of the kid who has gone missing and somebody else who's like a newcomer with like roguish charm, which is just gross. And the other character that's mentioned in the blurb is the police chief, and I hate straight up crime with straight up police investigators. You know, there's a lot of things in there that are definitely not Leanne things. However, this book was sold to me about being primarily about a small town. It's primarily about tall oaks and all of the little secrets that get like unearthed when these things happen. When everybody turns into a suspect, it's like everything that everybody has ever done wrong comes to the surface, and I love that. You know that that is like my #1 favourite trope, is like small towns that are decimated by things happening and implode from within. It does have an average of 4 stars on Goodreads, but it only has like 1,000 ratings, so I don't feel like I've got a big enough pool of opinions to like poll my peeps to see whether this is something I should invest my time in. So please trash this. Please tell me whether I should invest even 5 minutes in it or whether I should just like delete it into oblivion. So that's it, guys. Those are all of the books that are just languishing in the back of my Kindle, sitting with their walking frames, moaning about how it wasn't like that in their day. That's definitely going to be me when I'm older, just saying, like I'm poking fun at nobody except for myself here. Please let me know if you have read any of these books. Feel free to be as harsh about them as you like in the comments. I have 0 emotional investment and I'm prepared to have even less. But you know that I do like opinions, so if any of these are your favourite books and you desperately think that I would like them, then save them. Make sure that I don't delete them in just like a fit of pique. If you guys have enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up so that more people can come here and trash all of my books for me. And if you're new here, please consider subscribing for more of my opinions and my face in your feed. And I'll speak to you soon, guys. Bye! Oh no, I bet the noise of me consistently, obsessively popping these was really annoying throughout that whole video, wasn't it? Sorry, not sorry, it's literally one of my favourite things!